Okay. Um, Let me start off with a little history. The earliest part of the entire timeline regarding the Cabbage Tree Island dates way back to 1885. This was when the residents of a nation called Bonjalong, they first settled on this island, and they had like a self-sufficient community at first. Um, the early settlers had like an autonomous period where they managed to grow food resources, raise livestock, and do cane farming. In the year 1893, Cabbage Tree Island was officially established as an Aboriginal reserve by the New South Wales Aborigines Protection Board. The reason behind this establishment is that the Aboriginal families in the surrounding areas needed to be relocated to have a stable area where resources can be sufficient. And in 1911, the government started interfering in the island's autonomy. A manager was sent to supervise the land, and the island soon had imposed restrictions on movements. The residents' freedom was massively impacted by such a decision, and they found it hard to even maintain their own cultural practices, such as rituals, fishing, and storytelling. These properties were an essential part of their cultural identity. Um, Such as fishing being a symbol for the connection between people, land, and its waterways. The site itself has a historical significance among the Bunjalong Nation as it serves as a cultural and spiritual hub for the residents. And now onto the site itself. This island is located in northern New South Wales. It neighbors the Richmond River and the town of Ballina. And it's known for having cabbage tree palms, and that's why it's called the Cabbage Tree Island. The area of the island is relatively small, and it consists of well-known natural landscape and rural scenery. It's surrounded by river systems, as well as a bunch of rich wetlands, which makes the farming and fishing uh, very executable. The wetlands play a significant role in not only the local ecosystem, but also the traditions. They support marine life, such as mullet, bream, and flathead, and other fish species such as other birds such as Australian white ibis and eastern great egret, and they provide a essential environment for fishing practices, which we already know are a crucial part of their tradition. However, due to the island's low-lying topography and its surrounding wetlands, there's a high risk of flooding, especially during situations such as high tides and storm surges. These wetlands will be saturated during these periods of rainfall and lose the ability to absorb water, and which leads to flood overflow. And the island is exposed to a subtropical climate, which means typically it experiences um, warm, humid summers and mild, dry winters. In summers, the temperature can go up to 30 degrees or higher. And in winters, it drops down to 12 to 15 degrees. However, due to its proximity to the Pacific Ocean, it's frequently exposed to powerful coastal winds. During summertime, the situation can be even more severe as there will be tropical cyclones. These cyclones usually occur between November and April, which is pretty terrifying because the cyclones don't if even if the cyclones don't like directly hit the site, um, it still creates this residual storm surge, and the storm surge will also create like high winds, which will irreversibly damage the island's infrastructure. And the cyclones have wind speeds well over 100 kilometers per hour, which can destroy buildings and coastal areas. And also, it heavily contributes to flooding due to the infrastructure being broken. The storm surges can abnormally raise sea levels by applying this intense pressure through the wind, and they basically inundate any low-lying areas on this island, making the riverbanks go through erosion and further causing a rise in water levels. This entire process will weaken the natural flood barriers, making the entire island even more vulnerable to flooding situations. And also the coastal storms, they bring heavy rainfalls, which can further impact the island's vulnerability. And these storms, they cause heavy downpours that completely overwhelm the drainage capacity of the island, which can quickly cause like flooding and making the situation uncontrollable. And all these factors, they form these compound vulnerabilities for the island, which made the land council actually decide to relocate the residents and help them evacuate. Okay, that's the end of my part.
Okay, let me introduce the overview of emergency scenario. At the start of 2022, Eastern Australia experienced the record-breaking heavy rains and storms. This caused the widespread flooding, and Cabbage Island was one of the hardest hit areas. As Michael mentioned, Cabbage Island is low-lying and surrounded by rivers and wetlands. When the floodwaters came, the island had almost no defense. The floods destroyed 26 homes and six community buildings, displacing over 220 Aboriginal residents. The flood didn't just damage infrastructure, it left lasting scars on the community and the environment. Next page. For the Aboriginal people of Cabbage Island, the flood's impact went far beyond the physical damage. Land is not only the basis for survival, but also deeply tied to their culture, spirit, and identity. The floods submerged the entire island, destroying generations-old homes. Many Aboriginal people were forced to relocate, severing their connection to the land and their ancestors. More tragically, the community structure and culture bonds were heavily damaged. Cabbage Island is a 120-year-old Aboriginal community, rich in cultural heritage. After the floods, many Aboriginal people were moved to temporary shelters, and they separated from their community members, losing the cultural support and a sense of belonging. Even in 2023, the government hasn't allowed them to return home, further weakening their cultural ties. Next page. The floods also had a major impact on Aboriginal people's physical and emotional health. After the flood, their air on the island was filled with the stench of sewage and mold-covered buildings. waterborne disease spread, while many residents struggled with the psychological trauma of losing their homes. The forced displacement brought anxiety, depression, and further emotional stress. Even in temporary shelters, many faced discrimination and isolation, intensifying their mental health issues. And the economic toll was also significant. The flood destroyed the vital infrastructure, cutting off access to basic supplies. For those who relied on subsistence farming, they lost both their land and the means of survival. The slow recovery has left many unable to rebuild their livelihoods. Next page. Additionally, the voice of the Aboriginal residents were ignored during the disaster. The government's response was slow, and most evacuations were organized by the community itself. A year later, instead of rebuilding their homes, the government decided to demolish them, leaving the residents feeling their needs and rights were overlooked. They longed to return to their land. They want to reconnect with it rather than living in temporary housing. And climate prediction suggests the risk of future floods will increase, with flood heights rising slightly and smaller floods becoming more frequent by 2050. The 2022 floods caused massive damage to the island's infrastructure, and the slow pace of recovery means many homes and facilities remain inadequate to handle extreme weather in the future. So these issues highlight the deep and the lasting impact of the 2022 Cabbage Island floods. The damage wasn't just physical, the destruction of cultural bonds and the loss of spiritual connection have been even more heartbreaking. We must pay attention to these problems. That's all my part. Thanks.
Okay, great. According to the UNHCR 1951 Convention on Refugees, a refugee is someone who has had to flee their own country to seek safety in another country. They are unable to return to their own country because of fear of persecution as a result of who they are, what they believe in or say, or because of armed conflict, violence, or serious public disorder. The Cabbage Tree Island community clearly fall under this classification, as the 2022 New South Wales flood disaster, as well as the subsequent response by the government, has resulted in the community becoming internally displaced persons, forced to move into government-supplied housing in Wardell, not the country that they ideally would want to be living in. Utilizing the UNHCR framework that breaks down the critical needs of refugee populations during and after disaster events into 10 essential needs, we can see how the disaster response both lived up to and violated this framework. Next slide, thank you. Number 9 in the 10 critical needs facing refugees and the displaced in emergencies is the right to education. Those in charge of designing and governing the response to disasters such as the 2022 flood must provide education to children and young people under this framework. Providing access to education offers care and structure for children and restores hope and a sense of normalcy in a safe, adult supervised space. The education of the 37 students from Cabbage Tree Island has been severely affected by the flood and subsequent evacuation and inability to return to their town. Following the disaster and the decision not to rebuild the structures on Cabbage Tree Island, the New South Wales government made the decision to build a temporary dismountable school adjacent to the houses/pods that they had built for the displaced residents in Wardell Village. During the 4 months the school was being built, the students were enrolled into Southern Cross School of Distance Education in East Ballina. The long-term plan for the students is to build a permanent school to replace the temporary dismountable one. The temporary school includes 2 classrooms, a library, and a communal space. Utilizing the UNHCR 10 critical needs for refugees framework, we can therefore say that part of the government response to the disaster was to place the displaced students in alternative schools and to construct a temporary school near to where they were being sheltered. However, the response did fail to live up to the precedent set by this framework in several critical ways. Next slide, thank you. To start with, some of the 37 Cabbage Island students did not attend the alternative education organised for them whilst the new temporary school was being built, meaning that they did not receive education for 4 months following the disaster. And this, of course, is unacceptable and a huge disruption to their education. The alternative school was described by the students as feeling unfamiliar and jarring, as it was much bigger and less close-knit than their old school, and this would not have assisted the students in returning to normality following the disaster. Also, as a result of the disaster and its response, many students attended 3 different schools in the span of 1 year, which would have added to the instability following the disaster and resulted in a prolonged return to normality. The new school was also described as being like a grey institution, which didn't reflect the community or the country, and which could not have alleviated, and which could have been alleviated with consultation with the community. This instability in education compacted the effects of the flood and the forced evacuation, and is another way the response to the disaster affecting the Cabbage Tree Island community did not live up to the precedent set by the UNHCR 10 critical needs for refugees following disasters framework. And that's my part done.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Now I'll be talking about the Wardell temporary housing site. The temporary accommodation is located in 15 Bath Street, Wardell. It is around 5 kilometers away from the Cabbage Tree Island. The parts of the Wardell recreation area will be available for the emergency housing for the flood victims to up to 2 years, according to the UNSW New South Wales government in 2022. Actually, the government collaborated with Ballina Shire Council, Jelly Local Aboriginal Land Council, and the Crown Lands and Cabbage Tree Island community in choosing the site. They chose this area out of the respect of their acknowledgement and the support of the Cabbage Tree Island community. Their desires to remain the connection to their countries, which is the Cabbage Tree Island. The design of the temporary housing site was broken into small single studios configurations. As these 2 images shows that each of these modules contains a house-based services by expanding with the standard bed modules down there. Studios can be increased in individual capacity as required. This design ensured each home could accommodate any size family. Finally, this size was decided to set up to 200 residents within 51 self-contained housing units. And the modules are being built offsite in Hutch's Toowoomba Module Yard, the contractor of this project, and transported to Northern Rivers ready for installations by Hutch's on-site teams. They're also in partnership with Corrective Service New South Wales. Hutch's developed a flag pack concept using 50 of the modules. They individually packed all of the parts and created an interactive assembly manual, which was shipped to 2 prisons in New South Wales for assembly by inmates for skill creation. with training from Hutch's site managers. So they provided further contributions for it. And for the open green area, they are available for passive public recreation activities by the broader communities, including landscapes areas with parks, sporting fields, central barbecues, play areas, and a yachting circle. Also, special modules for on-site management, security, laundries, and other amenities, including a community health building, was also built in the village. There was also a site-specific school facility built for the residents of Warder Village, just as Josh introduced. However, not everything in the temporary house site have been done perfectly. There are several common problems appeared in post-disaster settlement and educations, I believe. One of them is the slow response from government and construction progress. The flood happened in February 2022, and the temporary house construction was not commenced until June, which is 4 months after the flood. And the Cabbage Street community did not move into Wardale temporary housing site by Christmas, which is nearly 9 months after the flood. And according to the interview, Mrs. Anderson, one of the flood victims, had to move accommodation 5 times within 5 months. The second lacking is the systemic racism. In the housing market, this led to indigenous people being denied rentals or facing discriminated practices. According to Mrs. Anderson's interviews, it is hard for them to try get accommodation like rental houses because once the landlords notice an Aboriginal family, they just say, no, I'm sorry, it's not available. And that's all my part. Thank you for watching.